Hello students, in the last class we discussed about the definition of the acids, the substances which have sour in taste that we call it as an acids. After discussing with the definition of the acids, we discussed with some of the physical properties of the acids and some of the chemical properties of the acids. Finally, we discussed what are the uses of some of the mineral acids. Now, today in this class, we are starting to discuss with the bases. After that, we are going to discuss with the physical property, then chemical property. After that, finally, we are going to study what are the uses of the bases. First, we are going to discuss about the definition of the bases. What are bases? If any of the substances which have bitter taste. The substances, if any of the substances which having the bitter taste, then that substances we call it as an bases. What are bases? The substances which having bitter taste. The substances which having bitter taste, that type of the substances we call it as an bases. After seeing the definition of the bases, in the bases, if some of the bases are water soluble, what? Some of the bases are water soluble. That type of the bases we call it as an alkali bases. ALKALI, alkali bases. The bases which are soluble in the water, then that type of the bases we call it as an alkaline bases. What are bases? The substances which having the bitter taste, then that substances we call it as an bases. And the water soluble base we call it as an alkali. And also some example for the bases are, if you see the some of the examples for the bases, that is sodium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide. NaOH is nothing but sodium hydroxide. And if you say KOH means potassium hydroxide. And also one another definition we can tell by seeing the examples, right? What is the common thing that present in the acids? If you see in the acid, the common thing is H plus ions, right? What are the common things that present in the acids? The common thing that present in the acids are H plus ions. Therefore, what is common in this bases then? Take any of the bases like NaOH, KOH, NH4OH. These all are the examples for the sum of the bases. Therefore, what are the common in these bases? If you see, I am taking the one of the example. Okay, I am taking the one of the example for the base. I am taking the example of NaOH. In this place, that means in this NaOH place, you can take KOH or you can take NH4OH. Any of the example you can take. But here I am going to take the example of the NaOH. After ionization, when this NaOH, if it is reacted with water, it forms ionization. What is ionization? The process of conversion of the compound into their respective ions. What are ionization? The process of conversion of the compounds into their respective ions. That process we call it as an ionization. Therefore, here the NaOH ionizes to form Na plus and OH minus. What here it is forming? Here it is forming, that is it ionizes. NaOH, sodium hydroxide, is ionizes to form Na plus and OH minus. Na plus and OH minus. Understood? After NaOH complete, take the example of KOH. KOH also ionizes to form K plus and OH minus. Another example, take the example of NH4OH. If you take the example of the NH4OH also, here also it ionizes to form NH4 plus and OH minus. After seeing these three examples, what is the common thing you are seeing? The common thing that present here is OH minus. What is the common thing that present in all the bases? The common thing present in all the bases is OH minus. In acid, what is the common thing present? H plus. But if you see in the bases, what is the common thing present? The common thing that present in the bases is OH minus. Therefore, you can tell another one definition then now. What are acid means? The substances which having H plus ion. What is another definition you can tell for the acids? The substances which having H plus ions. That type of the substances we call it as an acids. Therefore, what are bases? The substances which having OH minus ions. That type of the substances we call it as an bases. One more time I tell the definition. The substances which having H plus ions, that we call it as an acids. The substances which having OH minus ions, that type of the substances we call it bases. Understood the new definition for the acids and bases? Okay, after discussing with the what are the common things that present in the bases, now we are going to discuss about what are strong bases and what are weak bases. Now we are going to discuss about what are strong bases and next is the what are weak bases. What are strong bases means, here if in the bases the complete ionization takes place. In the substances, if complete ionization takes place, then that type of the substances or that type of the bases we call it as a strong bases. If in the substances complete ionization, that means NaOH is completely ionizes to Na plus and OH minus. And KOH also completely ionizes to K plus and OH minus. Therefore, this type of the bases we call it as a strong base. Therefore, what are weak base? The substances which are partially ionizes. The substances which are partially ionizes, then that type of the bases we call it as a weak bases. What are weak bases? The substance or the bases which are incompletely ionizes. If you see this one NH4OH, it ionizes to NH3 plus and OH H2O. NH4OH is ionizes to NH3 plus and H2O. Again that H2O ionizes to H plus and OH minus. Understood the strong base and the weak base? The base which is completely ionizes, that type of the base we call it as a strong base. The base which is weak or not completely ionizes or partially ionizes, that type of the base we call it as a weak base. After discussing with the definition and some of the important definition of the bases, now we are going to discuss about the physical and chemical properties of the bases. What we are going to discuss now? Now we are going to discuss about the properties of the bases. If you see the properties of the bases, the first property is the definition of the base. That is, the bases have bitter taste. Almost all the bases have the bitter taste. What is the taste of the bases? all the bases have bitter in taste. This is the first property. After that, the second one is bases feel soapy to touch. If you touch any of the bases, it feels that you are touching the soap. Okay, therefore the second important property of the bases is bases feel soapy to touch. First point, bases have bitter taste. Second point, bases feel soapy to touch. Third point, bases turns red litmus to blue. If you put red litmus paper in the solution of the bases, that base turns the red litmus paper to the blue. What is acid do? Acid turns the blue litmus paper to the red. But here the bases turns red litmus to the blue. And the next important property is bases conduct electricity in solution. If the bases are in the solution form, they conduct the electricity. These are the first four important physical properties of the bases. What are the four important physical properties of the bases we discussed? The first one is bases have bitter in taste. Second one, bases feel soapy to touch. Third, bases turns red litmus to blue. And the fourth one, bases conduct electricity in solution. These are the four important physical properties. Now we are going to discuss about some of the chemical properties of the bases. Okay, the next fifth property. From the fifth property, it indicates the chemical properties. Understood? Now we are going to start discussing with the chemical properties of the bases. We are discussing with the now chemical properties of the bases. Okay. Now we are going to discuss with the some of the important chemical properties of the bases. The first important chemical properties of the bases is if the bases, any of the bases, okay, if any of the bases reacts with some metals, if any of the bases is reacted with some of the metals, it produces the hydrogen gas. General reaction for this property is if any of the bases, if it is reacted with the metal, it forms salt and hydrogen gas is liberated. For any of the gases, if the gases is liberated means you want to write the upward direction mark. That mark indicates that the liberation of the gas. Understood? For this general reaction, now we are going to see one example. For the base, I am taking sodium hydroxide. In the place of the base, I am taking the sodium hydroxide. You can take any of the bases. KOH, NH4OH, like that. You can take any of the bases. In the place of the metal, I am taking zinc. Okay, in the place of the base, I am taking sodium hydroxide. In the place of the metal, I am going to write the zinc. What is this triangular shape indicates? Here, the triangular shape indicates in the reaction is heating. If anywhere in the reaction, if you see the triangle, then you want to know that there we are going to do heating. Therefore, the sodium hydroxide is heated with the zinc. It forms sodium zincate. What is the product you form? That is the salt. What is the? It forms sodium zincate. Plus hydrogen gas is evolved. This is the first chemical property, but it is the fifth property. But if you see for the chemical property, this is the first chemical property. What is that chemical property? When any of the bases, if it is react with the metal, it forms salt and hydrogen gas is liberated. Example, I am taking the sodium hydroxide. If that sodium hydroxide, if it is reacted with the zinc, or you can tell heated with the zinc, it forms sodium zincate plus hydrogen gas is evolved. This is the one of the important property of the bases. After discussing with this property, you already know how you want to check that hydrogen gas. Again, I am not going to explain it. After that, if the sixth property of the bases is the base reacts with the acid to form salt and water. This is also you already study. What is this type of reactions? This type of reactions we call it as a neutralization reaction. If when an acid or base and acids combine each other, it forms salt and water. This is the next property, that is neutralization property. When any of the bases reacts with the acids, it forms salt and water. Example for this one is, I am taking the base as in sodium hydroxide and acid as in sulfuric acid. This one is the sodium hydroxide and this one is the sulfuric acid. If these two are reacted each other, it forms Na2SO4. What is Na2SO4? Na2SO4 is nothing but Na is sodium, SO4 is sulfate. Therefore, sodium sulfate plus water is removed. Sodium sulfate is a salt. When a base reacts with an acid, it forms salt and water. Understood? And the last property of the base is, when bases are react with the non-metal oxides or non-metals, it forms salt and water. This is the next property of the bases. That is, when any of the non-metal oxides, if it is reacted with the base, it forms salt and water. Non-metal oxides. Non-metals with an oxygen. What are non-metal oxides means? Non-metals with an oxygen we called as a non-metal oxides. Example for the non-metal, it is calcium. For the oxide, I am taking as an hydroxide. You can take CaO also. CaO is calcium oxide. And here I am taking as an calcium hydroxide. When that calcium hydroxide, if it is reacted with the carbon dioxide, here 1 minute. Okay, if you see the last property, when any of the non-metal oxides, if it is reacted with the base, it forms salt and water. Non-metal oxide is non-metal carbon oxide, carbon oxide. Okay, when this carbon oxide, if it is reacted with the base, if the carbon dioxide, if it is reacted with the base, that is calcium hydroxide, it forms calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is also the salt and liberation of the water takes place. What is the last reaction? When non-metal oxide, that is carbon dioxide, if it is reacted with the base, it forms calcium carbonate as well as water is liberated. These all are the some of the properties of the bases. What are the properties of the bases we discussed? The first is the bases are bitter in taste. It turns the red litmus papers to blue. It conducts electricity in the solution. Bases react with the metals to form the salt and water. Bases react with the acids to form the salt and water. And the next, if the bases react with the non-metallic oxide, it forms salt and water. These all are the some of the important properties what we discussed for the bases. In the next class, we are going to discuss about some of the uses of the bases and some other information about the bases. Up to that, bye everyone. Thank you.